Hi, Janine. Hi, Judith.
Hi.
Hi.
We were just saying it might be a small group at this time of year, but that's good, I think. Means we can have more of a conversation and less of a presentation. Okay. Hi, to Blessing, Janine, and Judith, and of course to Asetu, a very small little group. I think this was probably not a great time of year for us to have this session, but I'm very grateful that you're here with me, and we'll make it more conversational as a result. Let me turn on my camera just so I can just sort of say hi. Hello. I'm actually at the Haltasa conference at Walter Sisulu at the moment, but I managed to borrow a colleague's office to be with you. I'll turn off my camera again because the Wi-Fi isn't that great here. So yeah, we're talking about NRF rating, and I'm going to give just a few words of advice that I hope is helpful on the process. But also, because there's so few of us, I'm really hoping we can just have a chat. So let me start off by asking why you're thinking about rating, if indeed you are. You might not be. You might be here for completely different reasons or just to find out what rating is all about. But it might help me to think about what you are hoping from this short session. If I know what why you're here or why you're thinking of applying for rating. Um, Judith, I'm sorry, I'm going to throw you first just because I know you, so I feel like it's not too rude to force you to go
It's fine,
first.
Sue.
Thank you.
So I'm not thinking about applying it anytime soon. Um, my I'm only just going to be applying for promotion from lecturer to senior lecturer, kind of on the basis of PhD and a few publications and the many other things I do in my life. But I know further down the line, if I potentially want to apply for associate professor at some point, that this is quite a useful
Mm,
kind of bit of evidence, I guess, of in terms of research.
yeah.
But yeah, long term for me, not certainly not applying anytime soon.
Yeah. No, but I think that's really wise because there are certain decisions that you can make now that can help you when it comes time to rating. I'm always worried about becoming so controlled by these measurement systems that you make decisions only on what counts in the measurement system. But on the other hand, even things like keeping what I call love letters, having a email, having a folder where you keep student evaluations or nice comments from reviewers, or, if you are thinking long term, then you can start to just very idly set up a few systems where you dump things in as you go along. Evidence, whether it's, for other things, it might be more about your teaching, but for rating, it'd be about your research. Plunk things in there that you may or may not use when you do apply for promotion or for rating, so that you're not sort of having to run around and think, oh, didn't I have a great review from someone like a few years ago. I can't even remember where was it. So I think it's a good idea to have these things in the back of your mind even long before you might apply for them. Blessing, if you don't mind, I'm going to throw the mic to you next.
Thank you so much. In my case, I just came to the workshop. I've been thinking about it, but so I'm currently doing a postdoc, well, a research visit really. I am in Germany, but I'm affiliated with Rhodes. I'll be coming back to continue with my postdoc in January. So, so I just want to understand a little more on what this is, because sometimes I see it in a lot of lecturing or faculty posts. You know, it would be an advantage to have NRF rating. So sometimes it's like, okay, what is this thing? You know,
What
when
is
is the
it?
right
Yeah.
time? Yeah, exactly. You know,
Yeah.
how important is it? And what are the benefits? You know, and so I hope this conversation is going to give me a little bit of clarity, and then, you know, then I can sort of decide, is it time? Should I wait a little longer and stuff like that? Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I think this is just the perfect time for you to be here with us. Um, I do know that the whole idea of rating hits differently in different institutions and actually says a lot about different institutional cultures. So at Rhodes, you would certainly have it on your CV, and when you applied for promotion, you would certainly mention that you were rated. So it's not that it's not valued at Rhodes, but I know that at some universities you have to have rating to get promotion. I personally think that's a mistake, and I'll explain why in a moment. But I do know that at some universities they are now saying that that rating is now a required step before you can get promotion. So, you know, you don't know what university you'll end up in, where life takes you. So it's not a bad idea wherever you are in your career and whatever institution you are in to at least know how the whole thing works. So welcome, Blessing. Gamu, how nice to see you. Why are you here?
Afternoon, Sue, and afternoon, everyone. Uh, for me, I'm here mostly because I just need to learn about NRF rating. I have not yet applied for it. So in my career, I think I will need to apply for rating. I've published in peer-reviewed journals, have gone for conferences, and I'm just thinking also of just seeing how my work is, the impact of my work, and also to use it for like applying for maybe lecturing positions and yeah, and other research positions. I've also noticed that it's something that is needed for you to to enter into academia. Yeah, so that is why I'm here, and I'm hoping to learn a lot from these discussions and and contributions from people who are in the group. Thank you.
Thanks, Gamu. Yeah, I mean, as you will hear shortly when I start the presentation, I have very mixed feelings about these issues. You may be aware that I have very strong views about rankings of universities, and I worry about the overlap between the idea of ranking and this rating. So I do have, I sit here with a lot of ambivalence, and I'll perhaps unpack that in a little bit in a moment because I think it's a problem that more and more universities are seeing this as kind of a mark of credibility, as a kind of a currency that academics are expected to have if they are wanting to get particular jobs or to get promotions. So I really feel quite troubled by that. But on the other hand, I sort of want to tell emerging researchers that if that is the game that is being played, let's at least share our expertise and make sure that you can all do as well as possible within that game. So yeah, hopefully that doesn't sound too confusing, but I will come back to that in a moment. Janine, hi.
Hi, yeah, I think you've just reflected a bit of what I've been sitting with is it does feel like a bit of a game that we're in.
Yeah.
I've just finished my PhD, so looking at applying for promotion from lecturer to senior lecturer, but also looking at Y rating and trying to figure out, do I wait until after I've got the promotion sorted to even pursue Y rating, because then it accounts for the next promotion rather than having it kind of fizzle in the middle, and also looking at Tutuka grant applications for potential postdoc funding. But if I do NRF rating, then I'm NRF rating track for funding. So it's weighing up all of these different options to try and game the game essentially. Because unfortunately it does feel like a bit of a game that you're in, and trying to get the information you need is sometimes difficult. So yeah, just trying to get enough information to make informed decisions to try and work the system to my benefit where I can.
Yeah. Yeah, it does often feel like that. And I think if you are sort of emerging, you're busy with the PhD, you're busy with a postdoc, you're busy with, applying for promotion. I'm increasingly of the view that you need to speak out against the system, but also that the system will exist while you are trying to engage with those processes. So even if you speak out against them, you probably need to navigate them as best you can. I'm at the incredibly privileged position now of being sort of 5 years from retirement, so I kind of feel I don't need to navigate the game. And that is a really privileged position to be in. So I'm very aware that when I speak out against these systems, I'm often challenged to say, well, it's okay for you to say that, but I still need to work within those systems. And so that's kind of where I'm at, is to say, well, if there is anything, and I certainly don't know that there necessarily is, but if there is anything that I can share from my experience that'll be useful, then at least let me do that. Thanks, Janine. Hey, Miracle, how are you? Let's hear from you. We're just asking people briefly, why are they here? You are muted, Miracle. Okay, I'm going to move on to Makhatla. Hi, Makhatla. What are you hoping to get from this session?
Hi, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Oh, thank you. Well, for me, I think most of the previous speakers have covered some of the things. I'm currently just finishing up my PhD, so I'm trying to get as much information as I can about what is NRF rating, how important is it, and at which stage should I start thinking about it, and how can it benefit me or impact my career.
Great. Okay. So again, as I said earlier, I think that's fantastic. And the earlier you think about this, the better. Even if you are quite some years off actually applying for rating, if you've got in the back of your head how the rating system works, then at least that'll help you in terms of possibly making some decisions, but also in terms of reminding yourself to just have a system to capture information that you might use when you apply for rating, so that you're not running around trying to find stuff. Sabelo.
Yeah, and am I audible, Prof?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, good afternoon, Prof. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm a PhD student. I'm collecting data. My future objective is to join the academic. So I want to know more about the rating and what are the benefits. Because the next phase of my career, I want to go to academic when I complete my PhD.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, I must say I didn't know anything about rating until I first applied for rating. I'm on my second round of rating now. So it would have been maybe only 6 or 7 years ago that I even discovered what this rating story is. And I do think that the earlier you know about it, in a way, the better. Even if you decide not to go for rating, just knowing about how the system works, I think is really useful. Last but not least, Sandasiwe. Sandasiwe, are you able to unmute and just let us know why you are here or why you are thinking about rating? Okay, I'm not hearing from Sandasiwe and Miracle, but hopefully you can hear us, and just know that you are welcome and thank you for being here. So let us go along with this presentation. So the first thing, oh, just sorry, hang on a moment. Hello. Yes, yes, that's me. I'm just teaching. Won't be long. I'll come out in a moment. Sorry, guys. As I said, I'm just squatting in someone's office for this session. So someone just walked in. The benefits of rating. Well, it used to be that you got a research incentive every year. Depending on what level you rated at, it's 20,000 Rand a year, 30,000 Rand a year, 40,000 Rand a year. No, starts at 30, I think, 40, 60,000 Rand a year, 80,000 Rand a year. That used to be the case. Now you get it in the first year, and I think it's a 5-year cycle. You get it in the first year only. Now, one thing that Rhodes University has done, which I sincerely hope they keep, is that Rhodes gives you that money every year. So while the NRF only gives you that amount in the first year of each rating cycle, I get it every single year. The first year happens to come from the NRF, and then subsequent years I get that amount of money from Rhodes University. And really that's money that I can use to pay for my students' fees. I think I get 60,000 Rand a year. I can use it to go on a conference. I can use it, ironically, the NRF doesn't allow you to use it on student fees, by the way, but you can use it to go to conferences, so on. But the subsequent years, when you get it from Rhodes, you can use it on pretty much whatever you like, as long as it's related to research. So I guess the NRFC, don't want you spending it on student fees because they want you spending it on your own research trajectory. But Rhodes pays the money in the subsequent years, and they are not so strict. So there's not a lot of research. So it's not hugely the money, not much. We are lucky at Rhodes that it's more than at other institutions. Access to research grants, hardly. It used to be the case that NRF had competitive grants for rated researchers and CGRR, competitive grants for rated researchers. And so if you applied for funding for research, you would either go into the big pool, competitive grants for unrated researchers, which anyone can apply to, or you went into the more narrow pool of competitive grants for rated researchers, which meant that you were much more likely to get a research grant. So that was a huge benefit. But it's no longer a benefit really at the NRF, because from next year they're changing to this process of thematic grants, where you apply in a group to address a theme in a transdisciplinary way. But it does still have some benefit for research grants, because if you're applying, whether it's to the NRF or to Wellcome Trust or the Medical Research Council or any funders, saying that you're a rated researcher really benefits in terms of showing that you already have some credibility beyond what they can see on your CV. You've already been assessed by your peers as someone who produces research that is impactful in the system. So there's definitely, as I say hardly, because it used to be, wow, you rated and you automatically had access to this pool of funding. That's not true anymore. But I do think funders take note of that. And I do think if you're applying for funding to an organization that is not in South Africa, when you say you rated, quote a little bit. So if you say I'm a C-rated researcher, I'm an A-rated researcher, quote a little bit from the description of what that means, because they might not necessarily know. Because they might see you as a C-rated researcher. Now in America, anything C means practically a fail. So if you say I'm a C-rated researcher, which means that and then quote, that I am recognized for research outputs that have impact in society and blah, 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 blah. So that you don't just quote your rating, you tell them what it means. That's probably less important if you're applying to South African organizations who recognize who know our system. And then, of course, it is going on your CV. An important thing to note is that as much as I feel very uneasy about aspects of the NRF rating, it is rating by your peers. We often talk about, oh, the NRF rated me, but actually they don't. They coordinate the process. And there are panels of your peers. That each panel, there are specialist panels for different research fields. And there's a couple of transdisciplinary research panels. They each have a chairperson. The chairperson is also a very senior researcher. but the panel members are also all researchers. So the people who sit around and consider your application and your referees' reports, and I'll talk about that in a moment, they are all themselves academics. And I do think this is important to note, because in part it shows you the value of this system. This is your peers. This is not some kind of government system saying that you are rated. This is your peers saying you're rated. But that can also bring in some complexity, because our peers sometimes, you know, have all the issues of yes, it's happening. Oh, Sandiswa, I hope you can still hear us. Maybe he had to exit and come back in. I've only just noticed the chat, sorry. So yeah, so that this issue that you are being assessed by your peers brings in all the petty politics and nonsense that can happen when people, I suppose, just being human, are having to rate other people and maybe feeling their own, I don't know, insecurities or whatever. One hopes that doesn't happen, but I do think that given that these things are subjective, there is not a clear metric that we can count. In fact, the few metrics they do call for are problematic in ways I'll explain in a moment. So it's very much about the narrative that you present and how that is interpreted by your referees and then by the panel. So that's why the narrative you present in your rating application is absolutely fundamental. So this is just a blurb from the NRF that they make very clear that research is about the creation and development of intellectual contributions, invention, and generation of ideas, images, etc., and building on existing knowledge to produce new or substantially improved materials. So it's very much about new, about the frontiers of the field. And they also make very clear that that it doesn't count as research if it's routine testing or routine analysis of materials, components, instruments, and processes. If you're not developing distinct analytical techniques and new findings and moving the field forward, you might be spending hours and hours and hours in the lab. It doesn't count as research until it actually makes that contribution. The same with the teaching and learning material. You might develop incredibly innovative teaching videos and online systems and new courses and textbooks. None of those things count as research. And textbooks do not count as research outputs. You might report that you've published a textbook somewhere in your NRF rating, but you wouldn't report that as one of your publications. I'll show you that in a moment. Very important, read the documents. The NRF produces a manual every year, and there are slight tweaks and changes. So read it now just to get an idea of it for the future, but in the year you want to apply, make sure you go back to that manual, read it again, because there are often subtle changes. And then the whole system is online. But I suggest you download, if you go online, you can see that there's a place to download the PDF so that you can work offline, and that's just what I prefer. I convert it into a Word document. There are different categories, and I think Janine already mentioned that. And some of them have gradations. So in A, you get A1 and A2. In B, you get B1, B2, and B3. A are unequivocally, you know, the head of the field, international scholars leading the field. There's no doubt that if you mention the field, everyone will know your name. B is you've got considerable international recognition. So you are quite well known in the field, way beyond your own country, way, way beyond your own institution. Good recognition. Maybe there are people in your field who don't know you because you're not an A, but you are very well known in your field. And then you've got C, which is established people. So remember, this NRF rating is meant to reward what they call it excellence. It's meant to be for the best. It's not meant to be, and this is a tough thing to say, but it's not meant to be that all researchers get rated. And the NRF have had to repeatedly say this. This is meant to be a rating to say these are like our top researchers. And I think that has sometimes become a problem where universities are saying you need to get rated to get promoted. So everyone has to apply for rating. And actually, the rating system is designed to really recognize established people who've got not just a sustained record of productivity, but they've actually produced quality, that they can conceptualize problems. So I think that there's been this kind of problem where the universities want to use the rating system to outsource some of their own internal promotion decisions. And that becomes a problem for the NRF rating system, which has said it's meant to be to recognize sort of people who have done fairly significant work. Then we've got these other two. So the P rating is if you are younger than 35 years of age. By the way, you can have an exception to that, but typically you should be younger than 35. If you're going to apply for a P rating, or if you're going to apply because they decide on your rating, and you are over 35 and you think that you should get a P rating, make sure that you very clearly explain in that section. There's a section where it asks, have you ever had an extended period of time outside of the research field? Make sure you fill that in and give a good explanation. So oftentimes it'll be people who say they only came to academia much later, or they spent a number of years with childcare or parental care or some other responsibilities that meant that they had to put their research career on hold. So if you don't meet that younger than 35 years of age, or in the case of the Y researcher, younger than 40 years of age, make sure you use that section to very explicitly articulate that you have not worked consistently up to the age, whatever age you are now. But typically P is young researchers. You need to have had the doctorate for less than 5 years, and you need to have exceptional potential. So a P rating is not for people who are who've just got a doctorate and a couple of publications. This is for people who've got a doctorate and a few publications that are really making their mark. So there was a paper by Jonathan Janssen a few years ago that actually tracked P-rated professors, P-rated researchers, because the argument is that a P-rated researcher is someone who's going to become an A-rated researcher, who are giving the early signs that, wow, this is someone who is really cutting edge, someone who's breaking barriers, who's like out there. And then you've got the Y, which is someone who is young, who's had the doctorate for less than 5 years, and who really shows that they are going to establish themselves as strong researchers within that 5 years. If you get the rating, within that 5 years of that rating, you will really establish yourself to become a C rated. So you are someone who's not just your average PhD student, but someone who's got a really strong PhD that's had an impact and has a few publications that's had an impact. There are clear signs that you are going to be building this strong research career. So those are the various categories. The process of applying, filling in all the forms, it takes a long time. So regardless of whether you plan to apply in the next year or next 5 years, I strongly recommend all of you log into the NRF online system and start filling in your CV. You can transfer whatever you've already got on OrcID. If you've got an OrcID number with all your publications there, you can click on something that will import it. You can click on something to import stuff from Web of Science, or you can build it from scratch. But it takes time. It's not upload your CV. It's literally for each publication. It's title of publication. Then you've got to fill in the year of publication. Then you've got to find the journal on a drop-down list. And then you've got to, if a journal's not on the drop-down list, you've got to add it. Then you've got to, page numbers. Is it published? For your students, the student name, the student ID number, the student title of their study, when they registered, when they graduated. And their forms are quite finicky. So just getting your CV on the system, if you have nothing on the system yet, we're talking about probably a couple of days' work and quite a few swear words along the way. So don't leave that till the 11th hour. And in fact, there's no harm in just getting yourself on the system now, because it also puts you on the system for other things that the NRF will then have you on the system. If it wants to ask you to perhaps be a reviewer, it'll draw from its system. And it's not a bad idea to be a reviewer for someone else's application. So I would recommend that you go onto the NRF system and you take the very frustrating day or two that it'll take you to upload your CV. The system has got better, I must say, but still. And when you are applying, there are various spaces in which you build a narrative. And think about the narrative that you're trying to build. If you have a look at those descriptions of the categories that I gave earlier, you're trying to give a narrative of saying, I have contributed knowledge that has had an impact. So for me, the biggest errors in the applications that I've reviewed, and also talking to my friend Chrissy Bowie, who is actually the chairperson of one of the education panels, and she says the same thing, is that people don't understand about writing a narrative about impact because they are so constrained by this publish or perish metrification that they think it's all about numbers. And so when they're asked to write a narrative, they will repeat what is already in their CV. They'll say, I've got X number of publications, and they don't tell us, why is your work important? And how has it contributed? And what is the key theory that you're building or argument you've made? Or, how has your work had impact? Think about the story you want to tell. And I think that's probably the weakest point of the applications that I look at, is that they just give a few bullets about, I've had X number of publications and this many were international or whatever. This section on the narrative is not bullets. It is still quite constrained in terms of word count, but it's a space for you to really talk. And that, remember, it's a panel of your peers. They want to read a story. They want to hear. They want to go, oh, wow, this is interesting. This is profound. So I think that numbers, everyone has numbers. I think you need to go beyond numbers. Including in this narrative of your research and your impact are various other sections. One of them is where you have to include 5 selected papers. I'll talk about that in a moment, and where you have to give recommended referees. Let me just interrupt myself very quickly to point out the importance of choosing your referees. One of the reasons why some people don't get rated, and it really saddens me to tell you this, is because the NRF simply doesn't get enough references, and they have to have 3 references to work with that's their rule. So you've got to have for the panel to discuss you at all, they have to have in hand your application plus 3 references. Now you can provide, I think it's 5, it might be 10 referees. It says up to, I think it might even be 10, up to 10 referees. Don't leave any of those blank. Don't just put in 2 referees or 3, because some of your referees, they are going to let you down. It saddens me to say this, and if any of you get asked to be a referee, please, just like being a doctoral examiner, don't be the horrible person who doesn't reply or who submits it too late. But unfortunately, the biggest challenge that the NRF panels have is actually having enough material in hand to make a decision. So fill as I say, I can't recall now if it's 5 or 10, I think it might be 10, fill every single one of those referees, and they ask you for their name. They ask you, I think, how you know them, I'm not sure. And then they ask you for the email address. Check the email address. Email the people that you're going to use as their referees. Tell them that you're applying and say, will you be ready? Will you be willing? Maybe even if your application is already complete, you can download the PDF and send it to them. So prime them. Don't just put their names down, because if you've primed them, hopefully when they get the request, they will actually respond. So do prime people, put in as many as you can, choose good people. In my experience, the more senior and well-known your referees, the more likely they are to not only reply, but to say nice things about you. That is not always the case, but in my experience, that seems to be the case. People seem to be, they're just able to be more generous, perhaps. As I say, it's not always the case. Don't be scared of asking big names in your field, and don't be scared of reaching out to someone that you've never met before, but you've used their work, and email them and say, dear Professor so-and-so, we've got this system in South Africa of NRF rating, assuming that they're international, which is an important way in which I can build my career and apply for grants. I have used your work extensively, and it's really shaped my thinking, and I'd be really honored if I can put you down as a referee. They may or may not contact you, and it will be anonymously submitted, because the NRF approaches your referees, right? The NRF sends an automatic, as soon as you hit submit of your application with your referees, the NRF will send out calls for the referees, and they send it straight to the NRF system. So you won't know whether they've been invited, and you won't know whether they've submitted. But you can, when at the time of of putting their names down, you can email them. So I would be inclined to do that before you hit submit, because if that stranger that you're writing this lovely complimentary email and ask them to do this says, oh no, I'm very sorry, I'm never, I don't have time for this. And you can take their name off. So give yourself a bit of time to approach them and see. But the NRF also has the right to approach their own referees, and they always do. So it's unlikely that all 3 or more of your referees will come only from the list you provide. There's a section where you can say any referees you do not want them to include. There are different views on this. I think you should leave that blank. Because unless you want to say, I can't, not so-and-so because they were my supervisor or something, or I work too closely with them or something, just so that you've got something to write there. Because, and other people disagree with me on this, it's very much just my view, but I think someone who says, I don't want, and then you have 3 or 4 names, I start to think, wow, is this person really difficult that they've made enemies with a whole lot of other people in the field? But it may be the case that you have someone who really has just taken against you and they're nasty and they're horrible and you don't want them to read your work, then there is a space for you to say that. So you've done this, you've put in your application, you've filled in the referees, you hit submit. The referees will then appoint from your list, and possibly, as I say, in fact, definitely they will also add people that are not on your list. So the NRF, in discussion with the chair of the expert panel, will decide which referees to approach, and they normally approach loads, and they have to try and get 3 in hand, and oftentimes no one replies. Janine, yes, please do come in with a question.
Hi, quick question, just about in terms of reviewers, are you allowed to put someone who's been your supervisor or a colleague or even a family member who's established in the field as well? Are there any limitations on that?
No, there aren't. They aren't, but they do ask the referees. One of the first question is, how do you know this person? And they need to specify. And there's nothing wrong. Someone who knows you and your work the best might be your supervisor. So I would definitely consider putting them on. So family member, I'd be very cautious of, because there may be an assumption of nepotism. But you may well have a family member who's an absolute expert in the field. Then put them on, and when that person does your reference, they will, in the very first question, how do I know? They'll have to say, yes, this is actually my niece, but we happen to work in the same field, and I believe that I'm able to judge her work. So generally speaking, of course, you don't want a family member. And you want referees that know your research work. So it's not your pastor, it's not your school principal, it's not someone who's trying to say, yes, you're an honest and good person, which you might perhaps want for a job or something. This is someone who says, I'm in the field, I know this person's work, or even if they don't know your work, they're going to be sent your work. I'll explain that in a moment. But they're in your field, and so they are people with expertise. So that goes through, then the referees comment on your work, and hopefully they get 3 referees in, and then the panel sits with your application and, very importantly, with the referee's judgment of your work. And one of the things Chrissy's alerted me to is the extent to which the applicant and the referees, when they use the language of a particular level, it helps the panel to kind of subconsciously or perhaps consciously recognize, this is a B, or, oh, this is a C. So Chrissy gives the very good advice. I'm just going to quickly go back to those slides. So, to use some of this language in your application, that I believe I have demonstrated the ability to conceptualize problems by doing this and this and this. I believe, use some of the language here to describe your work, because that's kind of what they're looking for. They're looking to say, is this rateable? And then if it is rateable, is this a B? Is it a C? If it's a C, it's a C1, C2, C3. And they're looking at the language in the referees and in the references and in your application. So you're going to build a case, you're going to give a brief description of your completed research. And this is where really some of them are so weak, because it's just repeating a few numbers, and that's not what they're looking for. They're wanting to hear, why are you saying this is good quality? Where do you think you've had impact? Coherence, how do these different publications hold together? Sort of, on the whole, where is your expertise? What is the area you're contributing to? Show the reader how these, you can say, I have done research on academic literacies, ranking of universities, the corruption in the academic publishing industry, and on the use of NSFAS. While these are fairly disparate topics, what holds them together is a deep commitment to social justice in higher education. Obviously, I'm trying to make up something to do with my own career, but something like that to try and show some kind of coherence and connection, even though often it's retrofitted, because I don't know about your careers, but mine's gone here, there, and everywhere. But you can kind of retrofit some kind of coherent commitment. Judith?
Is there a preference for more coherence over?
Yes.
Yeah.
There is. And in fact, it used to have the wording that you had to show that all of your body of work contributed to a particular area, which was nonsense. And many people fought against that and said, that's just not how life happens. And I mean, my attention span would never allow me to stay on one topic for my entire career. But there is still definitely a desire to see some coherence. And I guess it might be coherence of impact, perhaps more than coherence of topics. But you definitely want to have a narrative that shows how all your contributions fit together and have made some kind of impact. So think about, what is your story? Where have you had an impact? Where have you had influence? Where have you contributed to knowledge? Have any of your articles been used as a required reading for a course? Have any of them been cited by someone really important in your field? Have they been cited by people working in different languages? Think about how you've made a contribution. And then you've got to select your 5 top articles within the last 8 years. And there's a short little section under each of the articles, which you have to upload, where you describe why you chose that article. And that description of why you chose those articles, plus those 5 articles, gets sent to your referees. Now you can see why referees are often bad about filling in your reference, because it's not just saying, yeah, I know this person, they're a good person. It's actually about having to really critique their work, and they're expected to read the 5 articles. And so your little blurb is really important. You have a short little blurb about each of the 5 articles. So I would say, why did you choose that article? So you don't want to write the whole abstract. You don't have enough space. But, I would start by saying, in this article about the pernicious effects of rankings on university budgets, I have attempted to bring theory into everyday practice. This article has been cited 57 times, and it's published in Higher Education, which is a Quintile 1 journal. So you can refer, you don't have to, you can write whatever you like in that blurb. It can just be about what the article's about, but the person's going to get the article. But I think it's worth starting with a little half a sentence at least of what the article's about. And then, why did you choose it? I chose this because I'm very proud of this article, because I believe it really expresses my ideology very strongly. I chose this article because it was a theoretically difficult article to write, and I believe that I took these concepts in ways that have made it accessible, which can be seen by the fact that it has 107 citations, many of which come from countries other than South Africa. So a little blurb about why you've chosen it. You do not select any publications that are in press or that have been submitted or that are in preparation. You may not submit this. There is a section called Ongoing and Planned Future Research, where you can give a broad brushstrokes, big plan, this is the area in which I'm trying to work, this is a grant I'm applying for, or more small plan. These are the articles that I'm currently working on, or that are in press, that I'm working on corrections. But you don't include those as your 5 articles. If you do, your application will be dismissed. But I'm not saying things that are secret. This is all very clearly stated in the manual. If you've got a multi-authored publication, especially if you're not the senior author on the publication, you should explain what your contribution was. And they actually give you suggestions of, were you the instigator? Did you collect the data? Did you analyze the data? Did you write the first draft? So they give you some examples, and you give a percentage. I think if it's possible, It's not always possible, different fields work differently, but if you do have a sole authored publication, you should probably include that as one of your 5. If you've got both, I would suggest doing a mix of sole authored and co-authored. If you're in a field where it's always co-authored because you work in big teams, that's absolutely fine, but make sure that you include in those 5 articles at least 1 or 2 articles where you can really claim that you did the bulk of the work. Okay, we have time, so I'm not going to, and we've spoken a little bit about this, so I'm going to move on. You do have to, this is what I was saying, I think it's a pity that they now include the H-index, but they do. So you've got to include your H-index on Google Scholar and your H-index on Web of Science. Your Web of Science H-index is always lower than the Google Scholar because Google Scholar trawls the internet and includes a lot of stuff that is not on Web of Science. Web of Science has a much narrower database, which I think is problematic because almost all of Web of Science is behind paywalls. So I think Google Scholar is more egalitarian. It includes a lot of stuff that is not in, behind paywalls. But be careful with Google Scholar because you can edit your own Google Scholar, and it might include things like sometimes my Google Scholar includes my newspaper articles, and I actually explicitly exclude those, even though it's against my own H-index, because I think at the moment I'm still right, having spoken to various scholars that work on these NRF panels, that having a whole lot of newspaper articles on your Google Scholar can make it seem like you think that those are pure research articles, and they're not. So you can clean up your own Google Scholar. You can add things that might have been missed, but be careful of what you add. And when I say clean it up, sometimes Google Scholar will take the same article 3 different times. It shouldn't do that because it should recognize the title. But if the title's been captured somewhat differently on different platforms, it might replicate, and you need to go in and delete so that it doesn't look like you're trying to claim the same article 3 times. But all you have to do for the application is just literally put in the number. If the referees or the panel want to go and look at your Google Scholar or your Web of Science, they may well do so. But the only thing you have to fill in on the form is your number. Our library is really good at helping people do this. So if you don't know what I'm talking about right now, please don't panic. The library will help you do that. But also don't worry. I mean, I've got a couple of slides now that I can quickly show you that give you some idea of H indices. So an H index, basically, very crudely, I'll explain. It's the highest number of times that you have referenced per the number of articles. I'm not explaining that well. Let's say you've got 20 articles and 10 of your articles have been referenced 10 or more times, cited 10 or more times. And maybe the 11th article cited 9 times, article number 12 cited 5 times, article number 13, naught, 14, naught, 15, naught. So, but 10 of your articles have been cited 10 or more times. Your H index would be X. So it's the number of citations divided by the number of articles that have been cited that many times. I'm not explaining that very well at all. But they're very field specific. So what is fantastic in maths is absolutely terrible in biosciences. And that's what worries me about universities using them, is that I think we have more and more research officers. Thankfully, I don't think at all that this happens at Rhodes. But we have more and more research officers who just go like, oh, well, Professor so-and-so has got an H index of 42 and Professor so-and-so has got an H index of 15. So Professor so-and-so must be useless. I've only got an H index of 15. Whereas in that field, 15 might be absolutely great. So the other things to note is that your H index increases over time. Or if you drop dead, it will probably remain stable because you won't add any more publications, but you might get more citations. So the older you are and the more you've published, if you've published over all those years, you are going to have a higher H index. You can't compare different people at different stages in their career. And it's not age, I shouldn't have said older, because it's to do with where you are in your career. So it favors researchers with the longer research careers. It varies significantly in disciplines, and it can never decrease. So it only ever goes up or stays the same. Here is some stats which may terrify you, and bear in mind these are international stats, and these are very crude because they don't They don't distinguish between disciplines. But typically, and as I say, typically is a very crude term here, 8 to 12 is early career researcher, 15 to 20 associate professor, 20 to 25 full professor, 25 to 30 high impact, over 30 exceptional research. But an H-index of 20 in mathematics is exceptional. An H-index of 20 in biomedical sciences is, yeah, it's a professor, but it's not an exceptional professor. So it really varies. And bear in mind that in the global south, our H-indexes are also quite low, especially on Web of Science, because of where we publish, which I think is an important equity issue, that we want to, many of us are working in fields where we want to talk to each other in the global south. And so we might be publishing in journals in the global south that do not get counted by Web of Science. So you have to fill these in, but bear in mind that they are very uneven by discipline and even by geography, and certainly by where you are in your career. So this is for a full professor, just to give you an example of how very, very varied it is. And so, 20 to 40 is a full professor in the biomedical sciences. Again, we're talking international, so it's a very crude measure, but 5 to 15 is a more common H-index in humanities. And I don't know whether these are from Web of Science or from Google Scholar, because Google Scholar gives a much higher H-index than Web of Science. So I don't know if those slides helped. They might have actually hindered, because I want to say fill in the H-index, but that's a very tiny part. The real thing is building your case, building a story, telling a story about impact. I think about the 3-minute thesis competition that many of our PhD scholars do, and that I was watching the finalists at the postgraduate conference the other day. And really, it was interesting to me that even in fields where I understood absolutely nothing, because, they scientific fields that are way beyond my understanding, or certainly beyond my education, the 3-minute thesis grabbed me when they were able to make it into a story, when they were able to include terminology that was more everyday. Now, your panel will be a specialist panel, not very narrowly specialist. So it might be something like biological sciences, which can include all sorts of different kinds of researchers. So it's not hugely, tinily specialist, but it's not going to be me looking at something in biological sciences. It's not going to be Sue McKenna. Sue McKenna will look at things in humanities and in education, including in education in the schooling system, which I know nothing about. So you want your story, both in the narrative of your impact and in the little blurb for each of your 5 selected articles, to be more accessible than if you were writing in a very, very niche specialist journal. And you want it to be a story. You want it to grab people, not to, it's a fine line, because this shouldn't be like clickbait, and then what's more, dash, dash, dash. No, but on the other hand, it shouldn't be just a very banal, extremely technical summary. It should be a little bit more engaging. And very importantly, it should tell us about impact and influence. Check on internal deadlines, because the internal deadlines are always before the external deadlines, because Rhodes has to go through it and check that it's all complete and stuff. And just know that the NRF, there is no sorry, I'm late, I can't do this. And importantly, about 4 hours before midnight on the due date, the NRF system starts crashing. I've heard so many stories of woe. So make sure it's all up. Don't leave it till the last day. In the last couple of years, they have allowed an extra 24 hours because their system crashed, but you don't want that stress in your life. But at midnight on the due date, the system closes. But that's for the university to upload. So you will upload it on the NRF system, and our research office then has access to it, and our research office then goes through it and gives the institutional stamp of approval before it goes through into the NRF system. And our research office has certainly in the past, and I'm sure in the present, been exceptionally good at making sure that if you hit the internal deadline, they get it done. They do not, I've never heard of them battling with this system crash story. There are a few other things that you can fill in. They'll ask you about students you've supervised, both current and to completion. And there's a section where you can talk about making a contribution to the field in terms of your supervision. You know, your students that you supervised, what have they gone on to do? And there's actually a section that can then asks you, which may be irrelevant for many of you. If you're emerging researchers, it'll be irrelevant. But if you are more established researchers, there's a section that asks you, what about your students' publications? What have they gone on to do? And you can report on that, so that how are you building and supporting the next generation? And you can report on your current or past students' most significant publications. There's also a section on science communication, where how are you communicating the science beyond these publications? Because research should be a public good. So yes, we contributed largely through disseminating in research articles that hopefully build the field and move us forward. But are you contributing in other ways? Radio interviews, community workshops, newspaper articles. In what way do you take this research and disseminate it beyond your immediate disciplinary field? So do consider, you know, if you've done some interesting research, consider writing a piece for The Conversation or the Daily Maverick or University World News or whatever, which is a much more reduced way, a much more easy, accessible way of explaining your research. That counts in NRF rating. They want to see that you're not just racking up the publications, that you're actually making an impact. And you can show how you took the findings from your study to run a community engagement on medicine compliance or whatever, if you're a pharmacy student, you know, showing how you've taken your research and made it accessible to the general public is definitely something that is valued. I think that is the end of our time and the end of my slideshow. Yeah, thanks for being here, and I hope that something was useful. But yes, we've got a few minutes for questions, so let's do that. Janine.
Sorry, just a quick one. You mentioned Conversation and 2 others in terms of science communication platforms. Can you just repeat those, please?
Sorry?
The platforms that for science communication. I think you mentioned 3, and I just wanted to write those down.
Yes, so The Conversation and the CPGS actually run a workshop every year where the editors of The Conversation run the workshop. The Conversation is an online newspaper that is only written by people with doctorates. It can be postgraduate students who don't yet have a doctorate, as long as they co-author with their supervisor perhaps, or someone with a doctorate. And the entire platform of the Conversation is an attempt to try and get complicated science and rewrite it in an accessible way. And the great thing about The Conversation is that they work with you to write it. You get the final sign off, which is not true if you write for Mail and Guardian or Daily Maverick, where they might edit your piece and they add their own heading, which might not be what you would have chosen. And they work with you to get that piece ready. And what's really great is that they are licensed by under Creative Commons, which means that, I mean, some of my articles that I've published with The Conversation have been published in French, in Chinese, in Swahili. They've been picked up by newspapers in other countries because it's Creative Commons license. So whoever wants to republish anything from The Conversation, they don't have to ask permission. They can just republish it. So that's a really cool one. And there's various editions of there's the Conversation America, Conversation Europe, Conversation Australia, Australasia, Conversation Africa. So I work with the Conversation Africa. And then there's Daily Maverick, which, you know, is an online newspaper, which has got a really, has a lot of, gave me a thumbs up, which has a lot of articles about higher education, but they are, because they're a more general politics newspaper, they're wanting something perhaps more, I don't know, yeah, more particular kind of media. And then there's University World News. University World News is an online newsletter. If you don't get it, I suggest you subscribe. It's free. And it brings together stories from around the world that are about universities or about research in universities. So again, they are less likely to publish about your particular findings on plant, but they might publish an article on why we should be researching plants, or, yeah. But there are many more. There's not just those. You can publish in blog posts, you can publish a YouTube video. Yeah, you can find social outlets just to be able to show that you have endeavored to take complex science and make it accessible to the general public. Your community engagement work. If you can show a link to your research, that might be a brilliant example of science communication. Any other questions? Okay, well, thanks again for your time. Please do not wait. Please go on and fill in your CV on the system. I see that CPGS has put a link on the evaluation. Please, 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 there are very few of you in the room, so I'm going to urge all of you right now, if you wouldn't mind quickly opening the chat and clicking on that link, because we are always expected to give to DHET our report back on everything CPGS does. So because we funded by DHET, even though sessions like this don't cost anything, but it's really important for us to be able to give feedback. And of course, it's really important for us to read the feedback to realize where we went wrong or what additional things we can add to our program. So please, if I can beg all of you to follow that link. Thanks, guys. Keep well. Bye.
Thanks, Sue. Bye.
Thank you. I'm just waiting a second if you want to click on the link before I close it. Thank you.